Welcome to Advancement Live. It's Tuesday. It's 3:30 p.m. Eastern, and it's time to talk advancement. Welcome. We broadcast on the Higher Ed Live Network, a product of ED Universe Media. Find us at higheredlive.com and join in the conversation on Twitter using the Higher Ed Live hashtag. I am your host, Andrew Gosen. Today's topic is online giving days. The concept of a 24-hour online giving campaign is pretty hot right now in higher ed circles, but it's not new. The model can be traced back to the America's Giving Challenge in 2007, and it has been used with notable success in a range of contexts, especially by community foundations. It's taken a while for higher ed to take notice of the potential of online giving days, but everybody sure sat up and take notice last October when Columbia University raised $6.9 million in 24 hours. That success garnered national attention, in addition to a Case Grand Gold Award for innovative use of technology in fundraising. Today's guests are perfectly positioned to give us insight into this topic. CloEve Demmer is the architect of that groundbreaking campaign at Columbia, and Justin Ware, Director of Interactive Communication at Bentz Whaley Flessner, is a widely respected thought leader on online giving and online ambassador programs. Before turning to our guests, however, I want to give a shout out to our Advancement Live sponsors, iModules and Countermarch Systems. iModules software is the leading constituent engagement management provider for educational institutions. iModules delivers an integrated online platform that transforms how institutions strengthen constituent relationships and achieve fundraising success. iModules, we thank you for your support. We also appreciate the sponsorship of Countermarch Systems. From registration to check-in and participation, Countermarch Systems provides software that alumni and staff love to use. We build comprehensive, easy-to-use systems that handle the complexities of reunions and homecomings so that your staff are free to do the important work of alumni engagement. Our mobile apps provide a platform for alumni networking and social media connectivity before and after the event, and are integration ready for a seamless user experience. Find out more at countermarch.com/reunion. And now, on with the show. As I noted earlier, Columbia's Online Giving Day, which took place on October 24th, 2012, was a resounding success, to the point that many institutions are now exploring similar initiatives. This campaign was spearheaded by today's first guest, CloEve Demmer. CloEve has over 15 years of experience in higher education fundraising. Passionate about annual giving, she has successfully built and grown annual funds throughout her career, which I learned a few minutes ago actually started before she even graduated because she was a student caller at her alma mater. Demmer currently serves as the Executive Director of Development Operations and Programs at Columbia University, and in this position she oversees several units within the department, including annual fund programs. CloEve, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much, Andrew. Good to be here.
Thanks. So let's start right at the beginning. What got you started thinking about developing an online giving day for Columbia?
Sure. So back in 2009, I was living in Minnesota, and I was working for a nonprofit there, and I participated in Minnesota's Give to the Max Day, and this was a statewide, statewide giving day that blew my mind. I'd never experienced anything quite like it. They raised $14 million from 38,000 people. 38,000 people. And I sat there all day watching the website and watching it tick up, and just as a direct marketer at the time thinking, what is this that we're seeing? This is something really new and really significant. And so began thinking about how this applies and what the takeaways are from a giving day like this. You know, the closest we'd seen was a natural disaster and the response that came to that, which of course was really significant. So this was a man-made thing that we saw. And so when I came to Columbia, Columbia has just been a really strong major gift-driven machine for a long time and does that very well, but many of our annual funds here at Columbia are still relatively new. And so we were looking for a way to elevate the awareness of annual giving and the impact, and to really showcase what happens when the Columbia community all comes together. And the Giving Day seemed to fit here, and we're also a very decentralized institution, which meant we could potentially take all of our schools and have some fun with some gaming strategies and things to really get them working in friendly, competitive ways, and so that's what we did.
So it sounds like dollars were a piece of the puzzle, but they were not the whole game. There was
Absolutely.
also community mobilization and having fun as well.
Absolutely.
So can you tell us a little bit about the structure of the Giving Day that you designed?
Sure. So we designed it by following the model actually really closely to some of the state and regional competitions that have been, I shouldn't call them competitions, Giving Days that have been so successful. We didn't want to reinvent the wheel for something that seemed to be working, and so we tried to take the things that worked well there and just apply them here and duplicate. So we used a structure that involved all 16 schools and also a couple of programs participating. We asked our trustees for the first time to do an annual giving initiative, and they put forward about $500,000 in challenge money that we used to fuel the gaming strategies and the friendly competition. And then we developed both a freestanding dedicated website, but we also created a social presence by creating a Facebook tab that resided on the Columbia Alumni Association page. So those were some of the key items.
Great. How did your colleagues and the leadership at Columbia respond when you initially broached this idea? Obviously, if you had the trustees involved, ultimately you got to the point that there was buy-in, but what was the initial response like?
Sure. Well, it started with a conversation with my current boss, Liz Braden, and I give her all the credit in the world because it could have stopped there, right? But she really quickly saw the potential of the Giving Day and became a real door opener for me to continue to pitch the day and advocate that this was something that Columbia should do. And so we worked through all the way up to the trustees, getting that buy-in. And for the most part, it was really well received. You know, we had a few people with some tough questions along the way, but otherwise, you know, enthusiasm. And it felt, I think the feeling was like this is the right time for something like this at Columbia.
So that's interesting. The time was right. It sounds like if you had annual funds that are reasonably recent in the Columbia context, there was a strategic opportunity and you had a solution that lined up with that and you ran with it and got the green light to try something new.
Right, we did.
That's fantastic. So tell us a little bit about the timeline. How far in advance did you need to start working on this for an October 2012 launch?
So for October 2012, I started pitching it probably 15 months prior and pitched it for a good 6, 7, 8 months before everybody was bought in. And then we went through a process of aligning ourselves with some outside vendors who could help us execute the day. And so we retained Story Worldwide and also Kimbia to help with the day. And they were set and ready to start working only about 5 months before the day. So we had 5 months of like all-out implementation before the day.
Right. Did those vendors help you flesh out the concept, or did you have the concept ready and you hired them to implement your concept?
We had a really pretty solid structure that we wanted to follow, but when it comes to like the creative content, Story Worldwide helped to develop that and really talk about how to engage and building, you know, specific posts and video content and all of that. They brought some creative to the table that was really valuable.
Fantastic. And your next online giving day is
7 days away.
7 days away. Great. So we really appreciate your investing an hour with us when
That's
you're
right.
7 days away from this.
Yeah.
Did you start working on that campaign pretty much as soon as you wrapped up the one last year?
We did. Yeah,
Okay.
and you know, ideally, I think we would already be working on the next one now, but it's just tough to do 2 of them simultaneously. So we let one finish and then ramp up quick for the second.
All right, this is almost beginning to resonate with the way that reunion planning cycles work,
Yes.
where you actually start planning the next reunion before you execute the current year's reunion.
Right, absolutely, very similar.
Great. So you mentioned that the Columbia Giving Day involved 16 schools and a bunch of programs on top of that.
Mm-hmm.
Could you tell us about the process of making that happen? How did you get all of these buckets, all of which no doubt were happily resting on their own bottoms, on the same page and working towards this collectively?
We dangled a carrot.
Carrots are good. Carrots are good.
And that was the $500,000 in challenge money that the trustees put forward.
Okay.
And so the idea was that schools that participated could work to win money from that pot towards their annual fund. So we set up a pretty robust challenge structure, but the main and overarching challenge bucket was that the more your school or program raised, the more of that $500,000 you would get. And so schools became very excited and energized about how they could, you know, get those additional resources into their annual funds.
And how did you weight performance during the day against sort of different sizes of alumni population and that sort of consideration? How did you make it so they were competing on a more or less even playing field?
Well, we didn't for the primary one. It was all, it was straight. The more you raise, the more you get. But then we had a second challenge that was alumni participation.
Okay.
And so the top 4 prizes took home a lump sum. So I think if you got first place, it was a $40,000 prize. If it was second place, it was $30,000. That kind of a structure. And so that really helped some of our smaller graduate schools and other programs compete. And I guess that participation challenge was only for schools. Programs couldn't compete for that. And then we also had some hourly prizes where schools could come in and try to win the most donors in an hour, or a random donor drawing, and a variety of schools won those random donor drawings, and then they'd get an extra $5,000 kind of thing.
And my understanding is that there was some sort of a real-time dashboard that let everybody involved track how this was all panning out in real time?
Yes. Highly viewed by repeat visits,
Nice.
And second only to the homepage for Giving Day. So we had a lot of traffic on that leaderboards, and people were watching it all day long.
Okay. So you mentioned that there was a 5-month implementation period once you had the agencies on board. What were the main challenges that you confronted in the days and the weeks leading up to launch?
I think, we had kind of 2 main challenges. One was staffing bandwidth. Even though we'd hired these outside vendors, still a lot of the work and a lot of the planning happens right here with your own staff. So certainly that was a challenge, and the regular work that our units do didn't stop. That needed to continue. So this was above and beyond, or in addition to regular day-to-day duties. And then, other challenges, I would say that periodically the skeptical audiences would show up, and we kind of have to start pitching again. So those were a couple of challenges that we encountered from time to time, but for the most part, things went pretty smooth.
That's a sign of good planning. So I've heard that, clearly your staff and the agencies, your vendors, played a huge role in making this happen. I've also heard intriguing things about the creation of an online corps of ambassadors who also helped you make this happen, who you trained in advance of the event. Could you tell us a little bit more about that?
Sure. Happy to. Our social ambassadors, I would say, were a really important part of an integrated marketing strategy. So I wouldn't say that they were a silver bullet, but they were one of the channels that I think was very important and added a lot of value. So in the first year to launch this ambassador program, we asked each of the schools to identify volunteers, and then we brought them together centrally and we trained them through a webinar, and then they were deployed back out to the schools. And they were used in a variety of ways. Some of them were used in very traditional social ambassador ways where they're asked to, help push messages out to their followers. And others were used in more traditional ways of I want you to get on the phone and call these people, because that might have been their preference. So we had a group of volunteers that included the more contemporary and the more traditional ways of serving as a volunteer.
That's fantastic. And are they involved in the run-up to this year's campaign?
They are. We've actually formalized it a bit this year for our social ambassadors. So we are partnering with Social Toaster this year, and that's allowing people to opt in, and it's formalizing that social ambassador piece and actually simplifying it a little bit to have that tool that we didn't have last year. So that's working well for us.
So walk us through the day itself. What were the sorts of bumps that emerged, and when did you begin to get a sense for the fact that you had a tremendous hit on your hands?
Sure. Bumps. So I think a couple of the bumps. One of them would have been before the day, and the project management is just key. And so there's so many moving pieces and so many parts when you do a giving day at this scale. And to keep it all going, just requires top-notch project management skills. And so I'd say that everybody got a PhD in project management through that process in year 1. The second piece I would say happened afterwards, which was a pretty big bump, and that was the impact on gift systems, which we had talked about in advance. The piece that we didn't necessarily think through all the way was the amount of time that it takes to get a new donor record created, and we had a lot of new donors, which was wonderful, and so that took a long time to get them in the system, and just with the time of year and the solicitation cycle that's going on, that was a bump for us in trying to figure out how we could continue with our direct mail appeals and all of that without resoliciting the people who had just given.
Right. And do you have mechanisms in place to, at the very least, sort of buffer that
We do.
blow this time around?
We do. Yeah, our partners in information technology and systems and gift systems, they've all worked really, really hard to create systems and structures. So there's been several new programs that have been built, and we're expecting to do a lot more gifts in a lot less time this year.
All right.
Yeah.
So let's talk results. Obviously, the 6.9 million in 24 hours is the headline that I think got lots of people's attention. But you also just alluded to a huge number of donors, many of whom hadn't given before and who required new records. Could you tell us a little bit about the breakdown of the donors?
Sure. 40% of our donors were either first-time or re-engaged donors, so that was a big win for us. 30% of the donors were non-alums, and 80% of us, pretty traditionally, gave under $500. And so you can see that we had some major gifts coming in, and the average gift was about $575. So that gives you a little bit of a snapshot as to the donor makeup.
That is really pretty fantastic. So as you started down this road, did you think in advance about how you were going to define and measure success, and how did you do by those standards?
We did a lot of thinking about it. And of course, goals is something that senior leaders and trustees want to know about and want to nail down. And so that was something we had a lot of conversation. We talked a lot about it. And the dollar goal, of course, was the goal that folks wanted to know about. And I felt pretty adamant that if we were to set a dollar goal, I probably would have set it at $2 million, and that we probably would have ended up with slightly over $2 million. So we tried to not set a dollar goal, and in fact we did not, and instead focus on new donors and reactivated donors as a benchmark, and then engagement of alumni and friends. That's the whole community. And so those were really the metrics that we put out as to how we were going to measure success of the day, was on those two things.
And how did you measure engagement beyond giving activity?
Facebook would have certainly been, any kind of social site where you can track number of followers. We had 59% increase in likes on our Columbia Alumni Association page in the month leading up to Giving Day. We had a number of initiatives working towards that, so we saw that as a huge success. And that also transferred not just to the Columbia Alumni Association, but across the university and all of the schools. School-specific Facebook pages, they also saw really nice increases in the followers.
Oh, and that's beautiful, because then you've got a transaction that is also generating an ongoing relationship.
Absolutely.
On a social platform. That's fantastic.
Yep. So this year we're hoping to convert all of those people to donors, right?
Nice. Nice. Was there anything that surprised you about how the day turned out?
Surprises about the day. Well, I didn't anticipate that we would get as many major gift donors as we did. So we had a lot of, 50, 100,000 and up gifts coming in, online and some offline, where we got phone calls from donors on the day saying, I really want to participate, but I can't make this size of a gift online. How can I do it? And you know what? We found a way to let them.
You upgraded your systems this year?
We made it work.
Okay.
So all of that it was a surprise. I didn't anticipate capturing the attention of the major donor.
All right, but that's a good surprise to have, right?
Absolutely.
What do you know now that you wish you knew back then when you started heading down this road?
I wish I would have known the impact that it was going to have on gift systems. And I think the long tail effect. So Giving Day came and went, and the gifts kept coming. We continued to get phone calls from people who were inspired by what they saw transpire, and large donors calling, wanting to make big gifts. And there's opportunity to put a real strategy around how to continue to play that out. And I hope we will do it a little bit better this year. Last year, it came, the day came, it went, we had that long tail going, and then we had the hurricane last year. And so that kind of shut things off, and that was the end of that long tail. But for that week following, the momentum was really strong. So we're hoping to see more of that this year and have our fundraisers out there really connecting with people.
And with any luck in the world, that can't happen twice, right?
Knock on wood.
Fingers crossed, right? So a final question for this initial phase of the show. What sorts of changes or improvements are you putting in place for this year's Online Giving Day?
Well, we talked about the more formalized social ambassador program. So that's one of the numbers, or one of the items that we're working towards. We have more programs participating this year. So we have, our Miller Theater and the Earth Institute and the Zuckerman Mind, Brain, and Behavior Institute. All of those are coming on board. So we're excited about that. Barnard College is also going to be participating. So we have some nice additions there. Stronger project management right across the board. We have some additional grassroots initiatives that we're rolling out socially. So we're doing a turn your Facebook profile picture blue, Columbia blue, and a Why I Give initiative where we're hoping to generate a lot of user-generated content where they will participate and join the conversation in that way. So those are some of the key things that we're looking at changing this year.
Great. Did you do any sort of a pilot leading up to this, or did you just decide to jump right on in the deep end?
We didn't do a pilot. We talked about that, whether or not we should just pilot this with 5 schools. But the gamification of the day, I felt like was really, really important. And if we wanted to make this a university initiative, we needed to include everybody.
Right.
And if we did it as a pilot, it just felt like it wouldn't ever have the same momentum. If a few schools did it and then later we invited others in versus we're just going to do this as a whole university and we're going to see what happens. So we didn't pilot it. I would say we are in the pilot. It's a 3-year pilot for us. We're going into year 2 and we will be very critically evaluating the return on investment of this day.
That's fantastic, and I just salute you for not falling prey to the risk aversion that seems to so much higher ed thinking.
We had a lot of good leaders who embraced it and got excited about it, so it was a fun initiative.
That's fantastic. CloEve, thank you. That was really incredibly interesting, and I hope the audience found it as interesting as I did.
My pleasure.
So let's turn now from the specifics of a particular tremendously successful example of an online giving day to a broader take on the model and how it may fit within an institution's existing programs and strategies. There aren't many people out there who can provide a perspective on this better than our next guest, Justin Ware. Justin is the Director of Interactive Communication at Bentz Whaley Flessner, a fundraising consulting firm. Prior to joining the firm, Justin spent more than half a decade as an anchor reporter in television news, worked another 3 years in media relations and social media at the University of Minnesota, and ran his own video production and consulting business. In 2009, he was awarded an Emmy for his work as an executive producer on YouTube videos. For Bentz Whaley Flessner, Justin helps nonprofit clients achieve their fundraising goals through the use of online and social media. Specifically, Justin partners with organizations who are looking to build peer-to-peer or online ambassador programs for fundraising and awareness building. Justin, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Andrew. Thanks for having me.
So let's start off with a pretty basic question. Why did it take higher ed so long to realize the potential of online giving days?
That's a $1 million question. There's probably both very positive and negative ways of answering this. I think higher education in general is probably a little bit more careful. You mentioned being risk averse. Just the very environment, the nature of the environment is being certain of itself. The whole term peer-reviewed and knowing what you're doing and being certain about what you're doing. I think that's kind of part of the culture of higher education, and I think that might have something to do with the fact that it hasn't jumped right on board with the whole crowdfunding and the whole online ambassador, online giving concept. But and resources too. I think there's also the resources issue. There's been a lot of for-profit organizations, big companies, the Coca-Colas of the world, the Pepsis, the Ford Motor Companies. They have a lot of resources, and the higher education doesn't always have those resources, which is part of the reason for being risk-averse. So, there's a number of reasons for it. To me, really the optimistic thing now is that higher education is moving into this area. CloEve and the Giving Day at Columbia is a great example of a really successful campaign, but there's a lot of other campaigns out there, maybe not quite as high in the dollar amount or donor amount, but still for each institution, very successful, and everyone involved is pretty happy with those campaigns. So it's moving in that direction, and that's a good thing.
So outside of the context of higher ed, how have you seen this particular online Giving Day model evolve over the past 5 years?
people just know what they're doing more. I think that's true of any kind of social media strategy in general. The online ambassador concept is fairly new. It used to be you just had an online giving page, and that was really it. Maybe you could send someone an email link, and then they can click on that link and make a gift. So I think knowing what you're doing, being more strategic about it, having a plan in place, knowing how to excite your donors and get people on board and get that message out in a more viral fashion through the crowdfunding online ambassador model, knowing how better to build an online giving page, knowing what donors want to do and what ease of use means. There's just a much more smarter approach, I think, at every step along the way.
Ease of use. I always get happy when I hear people talking about the absolute paramount importance of user experience, because I figure that, especially from a higher ed perspective, we get one chance to make a good first impression when we're trying things like this out, and that can enhance the brand pretty significantly in my mind. But at the same time, if we do a third-rate version, that does a lot of brand damage, and we're really telling our audience that maybe we don't quite understand what we're doing, and we might actually have been better off not doing it to start with.
That's such a great point, and it does hurt to see an organization, they're excited, they want to try this whole online giving thing, but they don't put their best foot forward, and they don't have a website that's properly functioning, or they don't have the affinity built up with their user base and their supporters to really shoulder such a monumental effort like that. So, yeah, I think the worst thing is to push out sort of a half-baked approach and then fail miserably, because that's just going to be that much longer until you can justify doing it again. And you really need to be doing it because, as CloEve mentioned, donors at every level, from the annual fund to major giving. This is a great donor acquisition tool. As you just mentioned, Andrew, it's a great brand building tool. There's a lot of real positives that come from a well-run online giving campaign.
So let's talk about what it takes to make an online giving day successful. When you and I were speaking last week in preparation for this, you highlighted the importance of preparation. What resources should an organization have in place before they really are positioned to think about tackling an online giving day in a productive way?
Sure. Well, I like to kind of lead it down this sort of train of thought, and it starts with the question, are we ready for crowdfunding? Are we ready for online giving? Are we ready for an ambassador-driven effort towards giving? And I think the first question you need to ask yourself is, do we have that community? Do we have a large number of people online who have an affinity for this organization and will drive results? That might not be the case yet. Number one, it might be the case where you don't really have an overall culture of philanthropy, or it might just be that you don't have that online presence built up, but you do have the culture, you just don't have it online yet. So if that's the case, if you can't say, yes, we have the affinity, yes, we have the culture, that's got to be the first step. And then we have to go down a path of content marketing and building up good content, connecting with people on Facebook, connecting with people via Twitter, having a good Instagram page, maybe using Pinterest, having a good, well-built-out, well-populated YouTube channel, getting a content marketing strategy in place so that people start to feel more affinity. People start to connect with your institution or your organization online, and they're used to going to Facebook. They're used to commenting on things. They're used to sharing things with their friends, and so on and so forth. So, that, like I said, if you don't have that affinity, that's the first step. If you do have that affinity, or after you've built that affinity through a good content marketing approach, that's when you have to start thinking about a real online ambassador or peer-to-peer program. For giving, yes, I mean, you do need it for giving. But in general, just a peer-to-peer network of sharing information, again, really putting more structure around that community, and that starts with identifying who your potential ambassadors might be. Then you have to engage them, probably in a digital way through email, perhaps in person, but I think you usually want at least that email. Then you want to think about, okay, what type of content matters to them? You need to study, you need to track. You can compile this in sort of a content profile, so that you know who your most influential internet users, or you know what your most influential internet users and social media users, what matters to them, what kind of content are they going to share. Because if you're going to create content, it makes sense that you're creating content that has a high likelihood of being shared. So you've identified them, you've engaged them, you know about their content behavior, their content profile, you understand what makes them engage online. Now it's time to plan a campaign around them, leverage them. It should be something that is, one thing you're doing this 1 month. Every other month of the year, you're just sharing good content with them. It's not always about giving. But because you have that strong relationship with them, because you have this community of sharing information and they're used to that behavior, when an online campaign rolls around, that's just another thing that they're ready to do and they're willing to do. So then you're ready to go and plan that campaign.
So there are 2 points you just made that I absolutely adore and I really want to underscore for the benefit of the audience. The first is that one of the elements of ROI of a good social presence is that you get your audience in the habit of paying attention to you when you pop up in their news feed. And if you can do that, you can actually be a presence in their lives on a daily basis in a way that I think is unique in the broader constituent engagement toolkit. The second is the importance of learning each audience and what they're interested in and the types of content that they respond to, because there it's like learning a new dialect almost, but you need to be able to speak in a way that is meaningful to that audience so that when the time comes for you to ask them to do something on behalf of the institution, you're actually saying it in a way that's meaningful to them. And it feels to me like far too often that element of listening and learning and iterative content refinement is lost in conversations about content strategy. Too often it seems to devolve into, well, how are we going to take institutional messages and get them out in front of the people who we want to get them out in front of?
Well, that's right, and we've had success where clients have said, they've come to us and said, we need to plan an online campaign. We see all of our peers doing this. We want to be successful too. They do a real nice job in the months leading up to producing that campaign. Some of them continue to do a real nice job beyond that campaign, and the fundraising element is over. But this ambassador campaign is an ongoing volunteer effort, just like any other ongoing volunteer effort, where you need to steward those volunteers because they're online ambassadors. In this case, you steward them online using digital tools and things like social networks. So that's the key. That's what you don't want to do, is put all this effort into a big campaign, but then as soon as the campaign is over, say, well, we'll see you in 10 months when we start planning our next campaign. You really want to keep that connection going, build that relationship, nurture that relationship, steward them just like you would any other donor or any other volunteer.
Yeah, it sounds like that was one of the critiques of the incredible success of the Obama campaign in the 2008 election, was that they mobilized this massive community online that was pumped up because they just won the election and they were ready to do anything, and they didn't have a plan in place for, okay, well, what's the next step? And obviously they learned from that error and didn't repeat it in 2012. So I'm really interested in this point that you've raised about volunteering, and CloEve also referenced this. So when we think about volunteering, higher ed has a long history of working with alumni volunteers, especially, and in some contexts that is an absolute blessing to the institution, and in other contexts in which you are not managing the volunteers effectively and giving them meaningful work to do, you have them in these sort of ceremonial make-work sorts of positions that are, in my mind, totally wrong to assign to busy working professionals. They can get so frustrated that they end up sucking up a lot of time that you wouldn't have to spend if you were using them more efficiently. So where I'm going with this is the question of digital volunteers. Can you take conventional offline volunteers and train them to be effective digital ambassadors? Or do you recommend the use of a tool like Social Toaster that lets you actually go out to an established digital audience and ask people to step forward as a super fan or as a digital ambassador?
A couple of months ago, I would have said, if they're not online and they're not digitally active right now, if they don't have a big social media presence, then don't bother. Move on to someone who does. I have been surprised, though, by some of our clients, and in some cases, they've taken someone who really doesn't have much of a social media profile but was so excited about the potential, they built up quite the profile in a short amount of time and are doing some pretty impressive work for a fundraising campaign right now, and hopefully that will be carried on beyond the campaign. But that's probably more of a one-off. I think in general, especially when you're starting, look for those who already are active online. If you manage a Facebook page or a Twitter account or something along those lines, you probably have an idea who those low-hanging fruit are. Those individuals who are always commenting on things. They're always sharing your content. They're always liking it, and they always have good things to say. Those are the individuals I think that you want to focus your energy on right away and build up that core group of ambassadors, and then spread out and as you make more volunteer opportunities available. You might do sort of, I know some institutions have had a lot of success doing online training, online and social media training as a benefit to their alumni. And in that way, they've actually been able to uncover quite a few potential online ambassadors. So you'll uncover more as you go, but I think you start at least with those who are already online and are using it well, and you can see that very easily with looking at their public accounts. Do they have a blog? Do they have a public Twitter account? Is their Facebook profile relatively open? Do they post a lot of pictures? With a quick internet search, especially when you start with those low-hanging fruit, you can get a real good sense of who your biggest and most vocal ambassadors are. And then as you grow that program, don't be afraid to include someone who maybe doesn't have the biggest social footprint yet, but because their network is so potentially valuable, you might want to work with them.
Right. It seems like it's actually an opportunity because you have a certain section of your population that may simply not yet have a reason to be on the social platforms, and you run into these people who talk about, I don't need to be on Twitter because I have no desire to tell people what I'm having for breakfast or to read about what other people are having for breakfast, and they don't yet understand how this can actually be a direct contribution to the institution. Here at Cornell, we've been thinking a lot recently about expanding the notion of asking people for their time, their talent, and their treasure to including their networks as well. Mm-hmm. It feels like that's a fourth really precious resource that we can ask people to leverage on behalf of the institution in 2013. And I love what you're saying about that. So this next question alludes a little bit to a comment that you made earlier about longer-term engagement strategies. Online giving days are, by definition, short, intense, and very focused experiences. Could you talk a little bit more about the dynamic between these short-term events and longer-term engagement strategies? And it seems like this would be an issue not only for donors but also for volunteers.
Well, as you mentioned, you don't want to be giving volunteers meaningless busy work because number one, they can see through that. Number two, they're more valuable than that. So these giving days are kind of an opportunity for them to shine. This is their chance to really make an impact. It's their opportunity to come out and say, hey, look what we can do as an institution. So it can be a really fun event for them. But yeah, getting back to the ongoing long-term engagement strategy, and I know, at our firm we've really been looking at it this way too. A good online social media engagement presence and strategy really ought to be part of your overall annual giving program. It's not just what we do for a couple of months before our online giving day. It's not just what we do from June 15th on, because that's when we need to raise a lot of money quickly. It should be something that helps you communicate with your constituents on an ongoing basis. Obviously for those big giving days, but also throughout the year to remind them of why their gifts are important, to keep them connected, to keep that relationship strong, so that when you do make that ask, even if they don't participate in a giving day, when you do make that ask, they're more apt to respond positively. So I just think it's something you want to build into your overall communication strategy. In a lot of cases, it makes sense to be part of that annual giving strategy. But I think as we've seen, I'm just going to name a couple of stats here real quick. Just going to list them off, and I won't bore anyone too much with these. But online donors as opposed to those who are acquired, so online acquired donors versus those who are acquired versus via mail, they have more household income. They give larger gifts by almost a 2-to-1 ratio. They are more highly educated. In most cases, we're talking about alumni here, so that's a little bit less relevant in this case. They have higher lifetime giving values. So when we're talking about the major gift program and we're talking about acquiring new major gift donors, online campaigns can go a long way towards building that pipeline for you. Even if they don't give a gift, just the buzz that they see. And I know CloEve can tell you about some pretty specific cases of online donors who stood up right after that Columbia Giving Day last year and made some pretty significant pledges. So maybe it's part of your overall development communication strategy. But there's a lot of people online. Those who are online tend to have more capacity to give. There's all the reason in the world to be connecting with them on a continued basis, not just when you need their help in raising money, but communicating your mission, your message, and reinforcing why they give over time. I think that's why you have that long-term strategy.
Do you think there's any danger of online giving days generating donor fatigue, or of this being a novelty that loses its appeal over time?
You can certainly overdo it. I think if you have an online, there's first of all, we have our standard events, our homecomings, our end of fiscal years, our end of calendar years, if those are different. We have things like the National Giving Day, Giving Tuesday, coming up now, a very big event that a lot of organizations are kind of piggybacking on because there's a lot of activity around that. There's other giving days popping up throughout the year. So even outside of your institution, there's a lot of noise, I guess, when it comes to these giving days. So you probably don't want to overdo it. I don't think you would want to have a half dozen different giving days for your organization. Make it an event. Make it something that happens once or twice a year. Tie it into a Founders Day or a homecoming or some other significant event. Yes, you don't want to burn people out, but I don't think the concept itself will really burn people out. CloEve talks so much about gamification. People love these types of things. If you do it right, if you build a nice campaign that is a lot of fun to participate in, that has multiple ways of participating, that you can see your impact, and that you can compete with other people, if you do it right, if you have a good infrastructure in place and you make it a fun event, I think it's something that, quite the opposite of burning out, it becomes tradition. And that's the best case scenario, is if you build an online giving tradition.
Yeah, thank you for saying one of my favorite words, fun, which is a word that I think all too often vanishes from discussions about higher ed marketing and engagement strategies.
Yeah.
It seems like we feel like we have to be serious and, woo, we're saving the world all the time. That is very, very, very important, but, I mean, come on, you think about people's memories of their collegiate experience, and I hope that for most of them, fun is a large part of that.
Saving the world is fun.
Exactly, exactly. So, Justin, thank you. That was incredibly interesting. And now I'd like to kind of bring CloEve back into the discussion and shift into the final segment of the show, focusing on issues and steps that could and should be taken by advancement shops that are beginning to explore the possibility of an online giving day. So to start with, is an online giving day even a possibility for a small shop? What would you say is the bare minimum that you need to move in this direction, both in terms of staff and in program dollars?
Well, staff and program dollars. I think that it depends on what kind of resources are available to help with the day. So if this would have been an initiative that we needed to do entirely through our annual fund programs unit all by ourselves, we wouldn't have pulled it off. But if we had a very strong marketing and communication shop that we could rely on, we were able to hire some outside vendors. So we extended ourselves in that way. I do think that there's potential to do it within a small shop, and I think there's a lot of creative ways that you could come around a giving day. Just thinking maybe it doesn't have to be just one small institution by itself, that you could actually partner with a few institutions, share the cost across the institutions if you have some fun rivalries with some corresponding institutions or something. So there are some ways to think about how to pull it off. But I also think a key thing to think about for a small shop is it's going to come down to cost, and direct marketing is never cheap, and this is a direct marketing initiative. So I think drawing some parallels between the kind of money that we spend on direct mail to the costs that we spend to execute a giving day is really important, because that can help put it into perspective, and then looking at the return on investment in comparison. From
Columbia's perspective, how do those two things compare?
I can only wish my direct mails pulled like
Okay.
giving day pulls.
Mm-hmm. Justin, what do you say to smaller clients who are thinking about this sort of thing?
When you think about ROI, and everyone always asks, well, what is the ROI of doing something like this? And I respond with a question and say, well, what's your investment? However much you put into it, I think, is how much you're going to get out of it, and how much you can put into it is how much you'll get out of it. You really need, I think, three main areas to look at if you're going to do anything right online or with social media. Invest in good infrastructure, have a good peer-to-peer program, and then have personnel in place to manage that. Now, if you're a smaller shop, a smaller organization, you probably don't have the audience, and that means you don't have nearly the needs when it comes to personnel management, so that's one way you can save. Infrastructure, the more, again, the more I you put in, the more you get out of ROI. But there are plenty of things that are very affordable, affordable online giving platforms that you can put something together at least and do something relatively easily on. And then a peer-to-peer program, well, that can be as robust as you want it to be. But again, for a smaller shop, you might only need to have a dozen or so ambassadors, and that's a lot easier to manage. So I think that I know of one-person nonprofit organizations that do a really nice job with online giving and crowdfunding because they pay attention to those three areas. So it's not impossible because you're small or because you have a small budget. If you are large, then you probably shouldn't try it with a small budget. So if you have a large organization, a large constituency, you need a large investment. It'll pay off because you are large. You'll get a large return then. So I think everything kind of scales down to the size of your organization and the size of your staff. But any one person who is relatively savvy online and in social media could probably put together a decent size online giving campaign. And I actually just put a blog post out how to test a mini online ambassador campaign. It's something you can do with your current website. And maybe Google Analytics and perhaps one sort of out-of-the-box online giving solution. So it can be fairly easy to do on a small scale for low budget.
Yeah, one of the things that I most enjoy about the digital space is how the tools are force multipliers in the sense that the right person in the right position in an organization with the right idea can actually have an impact that's totally disproportionate to the number of people hours that they can actually throw into it. And I love seeing tiny little independent schools come out of nowhere with an absolutely fantastic idea that forces us to rethink a lot of stuff that we've taken for granted.
That's right. That's right. And it doesn't mean just throw money at it. Don't just throw money at the problem and say, "Oh, I spent $100,000 on a website, so we should be fine." You still have to be very smart about it.
Great. So, are there any resources that you would recommend to advancement staff members who are beginning to think about online giving days? I know, CloEve, you mentioned that you took lots of cues from not only this initial one that inspired you in Minnesota, but from other community online giving days.
Yeah, the most valuable resources that I found were talking to people who had executed giving days. And there are a number of higher ed institutions now that have done giving days on all sorts of different scales with different goals. And also, of course, the state and regional events that I talked about. So there are a lot of people out there now, and they're very eager and willing to share their information, the challenges they ran into, the big wins that they discovered. So, a lot of very helpful partners out there to feed a strategy.
Yeah, I will echo that. I mean, you can learn how to do social media well on social media. Start a Twitter account, read people's blogs, follow some of the hashtags that are floating around. I think one popular one today is that case SMC. There's a lot of free online resources and a lot of people who are really happy to talk about this. The beautiful part is it's really not rocket science. It just takes doing, and it takes knowing your own audience.
Mm-hmm.
And it takes a reasonable sense of how long it takes to actually build this community that you're ultimately going to tap into when the time is right.
Exactly.
So let's talk a little bit about pitching this idea to leadership. What would you say are the key selling points, the reasons why an institution ought to leave risk aversion behind and go for it?
Well, I'll go first. From my perspective, I think the engagement piece is really key. From students, faculty, parents, friends. I mean, it engaged here at Columbia everyone. I mean, it was really remarkable. And there are not all that many opportunities for an institution to engage everybody and rally them together in that way. So that, I think, is a real big selling point. And the other piece, I think, is the opportunity to engage and convert new donors or reactivate donors who have maybe stepped away for no real reason, but they just need to be re-inspired to come back into the fold. So I think that those are a couple of the key selling points that I would focus on.
Yeah, I think you have to really drill down to what it is that your management, your leadership, your administration wants to do. What do they want to accomplish? Is the goal increased participation? Because there's a slightly different answer for how you position online and social media to do just that, as opposed to increase the overall dollar amount for fundraising, for example. So I think you need to know what it is that you want to accomplish, and then think about, okay, well, how does social media do this? Because, I mean, social media, online communications, it's broad. It is communications, and there are vastly different communication strategies for different objectives. So first identify that, and then kind of, to get what we were just talking about, research the case studies, see what's worked well, see which institutions have done a really nice job getting more students to give, if that's your goal. See which institutions have raised a massive amount of money in a short period of time, if that's your goal. See which institutions have taken, participation from 30 to 35% because of a campaign. There's a lot of real good success stories out there, and I would, pinpoint what it really is that matters to your leadership, and then figure out who did that well, who's done that well.
What about the concerns and objections that you should anticipate you're going to hear about as you work to gain buy-in? CloEve, you mentioned that there were sporadic eruptions of skepticism that you had to manage as you headed towards launch.
I think the big concern is public failure, right? It's very out there, and everybody knows you're doing it, and the results are ticking real time, and that's when a person starts to feel a little uncomfortable around the idea. Well, what if we don't raise enough money that we end up looking, I guess, embarrassed online? So thinking through, a strategy around that is important. What are the worst case scenarios? How can we avoid that? At Columbia, we have a 2-week early give opportunity where we secure commitments from folks in advance so that we can rest assured and we're covering ourselves a little bit to know that it's going to be successful, or if we need to shift gears and figure out something else for the day, we can do that. So that's been one way that we've gotten around that. But I think most institutions would face that question from senior leaders. Well, what does this look like if it goes bad? How can it damage our reputation? Other concerns and objections, I think, the cost piece that I already spoke to, so I won't elaborate on that again, but it can be an expensive investment, but it's important to keep it all in context.
Yeah, and for the first time around, if this is, sort of your, inaugural / pilot program type thing, you probably want to be careful about goal setting and how you approach that. I think it's wise maybe not to put a dollar amount on it, or I've heard this from, Andrew, you might have been the one to tell me this, or someone did recently, but start with a lot of small campaigns to kind of achieve one larger goal for a couple of reasons. Number one, it's much easier to meet a $5,000 or $10,000 goal, maybe a $20,000 goal. Number two, that goes back to really helping the donor see themselves in the gift. If you have a $2.5 million campaign goal, $25 doesn't seem to mean much there. But if you're spending or if you're trying to achieve a $10,000 or $15,000, $20,000 goal towards a very specific purpose, that donor can really see themselves in that gift. It communicates the message and the impact of their philanthropy, and it can help you achieve a much larger goal if you assemble a lot of those smaller goals together, especially if you have that crowdfunding approach and you have a lot of ambassadors and you have nice infrastructure for those ambassadors where they kind of have their own sort of team page. Then you can really kill yet another bird with that same stone by allowing your ambassadors to really have their own space that they can own. So one way of doing this, I think, if you're worried about what if is 100,000 too much? Is 200,000 too much? Is 2 million too much? I'm starting with a collection of much smaller funds and having that build up towards one larger goal.
So we're beginning to come to the end of our hour. Once again, this has been such an interesting conversation that it's amazing how fast time flies. I have one parting question for each of you. If you could peer into your crystal ball, what do you think the online giving day is going to look like 3 to 5 years from now?
That's a good one. I'll go second.
All right. I think we're going to see much more aggressive online ambassadors. I think you're going to see some volunteers, especially for the institutions that enable them with the right infrastructure. I think you're going to see some volunteers really take this thing over and drive it. And the challenge for these institutions, and it'll be a good one, is how do we manage these extremely aggressive, enthusiastic ambassadors and have everything make sense and make sure it's still fair. So I guess that's kind of really wishful thinking, but I think that's one thing we'll start to see is the individual user will become so empowered and so excited about the potential of these giving days that that in itself will kind of be a challenge. But like I said, it'll be a real good one.
It'll be a pleasure to manage against that.
Yes.
So I'll just add, because I agree with what Justin said there, but I do think that integrated marketing is going to continue to play a role. We've seen that in all of our other channels historically, that they're stronger when they're used together. So I think we're going to continue to see a more integrated approach with some of our more traditional channels. So that would be my crystal ball approach. But I'd also expect that we're going to see it migrate and change a little bit. I don't think it'll look exactly like it does now. It'll shift and serve in different ways.
And in your vision of a more integrated approach, does that encompass print as well?
Absolutely.
I mean, speculation as to what that might look like, or is that?
Well, I just think from the standpoint of a giving day, we certainly promoted it in print. We actually, sent out a postcard, and we had it in our Columbia magazine. So just making sure that the message gets people wherever they're at socially is certainly a very important channel, and one that will continue to grow exactly as I think Justin is predicting. But I think that those other channels are still going to be important.
I'd like to second that, and I think that's part of it. If it really does truly become integrated, part of the process, so that some of the questions that we asked today, should you do this? Is it worth the risk? It will be looked at just as ridiculous as saying, should we put stuff in envelopes and drop it in the mail?
Great. Justin, CloEve, thank you so much for joining me this afternoon. This has been a real pleasure to talk through these issues. The main image that I have in my mind as we wrap up here is something that actually was inspired by a comment you made, CloEve, about the entire Columbia community mobilizing around this initiative. And I think there's something so powerful. It's the real-time board that shows you all of the activity. It's almost a dynamic infographic that is illustrating to everybody who's participating what the community is accomplishing together as the seconds tick on by. And it feels to me like that's an incredibly unique experience that I can't really imagine delivering to the community in any other way than this. Mm-hmm. And I almost feel like that moment of coming together in and of itself almost would justify the energy that you put into making something like this happen.
I think that's very true. It's really significant.
Fantastic. Thank you again. We have now come to the hour. Please join us again next Tuesday when Ryan Catherwood will be speaking with LinkedIn's John Hill. Once again, thank you to our sponsors, iModules and Countermarch Systems. As always, you can watch more shows from Advancement Pros on the Advancement Live archive located at higheredlive.com. Thanks to everyone who tuned in live, and see you next time.
Thanks, Andrew.
Thank you, Andrew.